We're going to chart the rapid fall of Anne Boleyn. On the 29th of April, Anne had had an argument with Henry Norris. Henry Norris was groom of the stool to Henry VIII and one of his closest friends. Norris was engaged to one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting, her cousin, Madge Shelton. Anne challenged Norris as to why he was taking so long to get round to marrying Madge. When he gave her a non-committal answer, she shot back at him, "You look for dead man's shoes, for if aught came to the king but good, you should look to have me." Norris was horrified, and he replied if he had any such thought, he would his head were off. Anne was immediately frightened by her words and the repercussions they could bring. Not only was this an inappropriate thing to say for a married woman, she wasn't any old married woman, she was married to the king, and she had also uttered words that spoke about the king's death. Anne was right to be scared. Her words were used as evidence against her to prove a relationship between her and Norris, and also that there was a plot to kill the king. On the 30th of April, Anne was seen arguing with Henry VIII, and also the first of the arrests of the men were made. Mark Smeaton was taken to Thomas Cromwell's house to be interrogated. 24 hours later, he'd confessed to having sex with the Queen on 3 occasions. Whether or not Smeaton was tortured, we can't say for sure, but he didn't show any signs, or it wasn't reported that he showed any signs of physical injury when he went to the scaffolding on the 17th of May, where he was beheaded. Possibly psychological torture was employed, maybe promises that his sentence would be commuted. He was not a noble, so if he was convicted of treason, then his sentence would have been the horrendous being hung, drawn and quartered. Anne and Henry were at Greenwich Palace when the argument between them was seen. Anne was seen holding up Elizabeth to Henry and pleading with him. Now, although we don't know exactly what the argument was about, we don't know what words were uttered, we could maybe surmise that this had something to do with Henry hearing of the conversation that Anne had had with Henry Norris the day before. Whatever was going on the 30th of April, travel plans for the court had been abruptly changed. The court should have been going to Rochester on the first leg of a trip to Calais, which was now supposedly postponed and was only going to have Henry take part as opposed to Henry and Anne. The following day, on the 1st of May, the Mayday joust took place at Greenwich Palace. Anne sat next to Henry, probably definitely unaware of the events that were about to unfold so quickly over the following couple of weeks. Henry Norris was leading the defenders against Anne's own brother George Boleyn, who was leading the challengers. Henry VIII was sitting this one out because of an injury he had sustained earlier on in the year. So all probably seemed well to Anne. Maybe she had an inkling that Henry wasn't the happiest he'd been, but maybe that she'd weathered this recent storm and the argument with Norris wasn't going to have any major repercussions. Henry showed no sign of being displeased. Henry Norris's horse wouldn't run in one of the jousts, and Henry offered him his own horse. Yet at the end of the joust, Henry had received a letter and he abruptly left, taking only 6 attendants with him and riding on horseback back to Westminster Palace from Greenwich. Those attendants included Henry Norris, who was interrogated by Henry VIII for the hour-long ride back to Westminster. Anne was left at Greenwich and never saw Henry again. One of Norris's servants reported that Norris had been repeatedly questioned by the king, and the king saying, just tell me the truth. You'll have a pardon if you just tell me the truth. The letter Henry received was probably from Cromwell with detail of Smeaton's confession, and he was trying to get out of Norris what he knew about the accusations against the Queen. By the end of the day, on the 2nd of May, Henry Norris, George Boleyn and Anne were all in the Tower of London. Now, Anne was at Greenwich watching a real tennis match when she received a summons to go to the Privy Council. When she reached the council chamber, the Royal Commission, which included her uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, were there, and they informed her that she was being accused of adultery. They told her she was being accused of adultery with 3 men, although they only named 2, Smeaton and Norris. Anne protested her innocence, but of course that was to no avail, and she was taken to the Tower at about 2 o'clock that afternoon by barge. She entered through a gate in the Byward Tower, so not Traitor's Gate as some stories go, and she was conveyed to the same apartments where she had stayed the night before her coronation. Once in the Tower, Anne was under the watchful eye of the Constable of the Tower, Sir William Kingston, and he was reporting back everything Anne said to Cromwell. Anne must have felt incredible dread and fear, and she began to talk a lot, and her ramblings possibly led to a further arrest the day after. In a conversation Anne had with Kingston, she asked, "Shall I die without justice?" To which Kingston replied, "Even the poorest of the king's subjects has justice." To which Anne laughed. Not only does that show that she doubted that real justice would be done, but that perhaps it was really dawning on her now the hopelessness of her situation. On the 3rd of May, Anne continued to talk, and Kingston continued to report back to Cromwell what she had been saying. She was talking out loud about going through why she thought Norris had been arrested alongside her. And Kingston reported back to Cromwell that she said that she more feared Weston when talking about Norris. Anne had reprimanded Weston for being in love with one of her ladies in waiting more than he was his own wife. When she confronted him, he had apparently said that there was one in the house that he loved above all others. When she pressed him as to who that was, he said, "It's you." Not surprisingly, once that report got back to Cromwell, Weston was also arrested and sent to the Tower.